How do deists and practitioners of CCT today determine their destinies with divination?
Most common of the methods are those that involve the use of bamboo sticks and crescent-shaped blocks. In CCT temples, devotees approach a barrel crammed full of long sticks containing combinations of trigrams called hexagrams, or, alternatively, numbers from 1 to 64, the total number of combinations of the 8 trigrams. Grabbing a handful of sticks, they shake them and then let them fall back into the barrel. Invariably one stick will protrude above the rest, and it provides the critical symbol for that individual to interpret. When sticks are numbered, devotees request a corresponding slip of paper from the temple staff. On the paper they then read an often enigmatic or poetic interpretation of the corresponding hexagram. Devotees can also drop a pair of crescent-shaped blocks with one smooth side symbolizing yang and one convex side symbolizing yin. Devotees pose questions as they drop the blocks. One yang and one yin side up means yes, while the other combinations mean no. Worshippers unsatisfied with a particular answer may simply continue dropping blocks until they receive the desired response.
How is music important in Shinto ritual?
Gagaku, refined music, is ancient courtly music originating in China as early as the Han Dynasty and cultivated by the Japanese in Heian imperial circles. Often associated with dance, the 14-member instrumental ensemble consists of percussion and reeds. But it also includes the stringed instrument similar to the Hawaiian guitar called the so. Cousin of the larger koto, identifiable by its frequent use of the technique of note bending. A pluck string called the baiwa is also part of the ensemble. Woodwinds are the 3 reeds, sankan, short, piccolo-like 6 and 9-hole flutes. A primitive oboe-like woodwind that produces a sharp, edgy sound. And a cluster of 17 bamboo pipes called the sho that is in fact a tiny pipe organ for the mouth. Slow stately rhythms beat out by the percussion underlie the haunting, almost plaintive sounds of the high-pitched reeds. Few sounds are a more apt musical communication of the sense of solemnity and perfect otherness of the deities the music addresses in Shinto shrines. Most non-Japanese who encounter music identified as Japanese are likely to associate that musical tradition with the sound of plucked strings, such as the koto and shamisen. In Shinto shrine ritual, however, stringed instruments do not play the major role they play in Chinese ritual. Percussion and woodwinds make up the bulk of the typical ceremonial ensemble. Percussion instruments include the massive taiko, a large barrel with 2 skin heads that sit sideways on an elevated stand just inside the outer ritual hall of larger shrines. A shrine ritualist, often one of the miko, deaconesses, announces the beginning of ceremonies by a pulse-pounding crescendo decrescendo on the great drum. Various smaller drums keep time for dances.
What questions does the prospect of interfaith marriage raise for Hindus?
In India, with its vast Hindu majority, it is still largely taken for granted that young people will marry members of their own denomination or sect as well as of their own caste. Outside India, various external cultural pressures are changing such assumptions. Since Hindu tradition remains so intimately bound to cultural background, many traditional Hindu families would naturally prefer that their children marry other Hindus. By and large, the younger generation continues to do so.
What do Shinto practitioners believe about ultimate spiritual reality or God?
Kami is the most important term in Shinto theology. Its general meaning is high or superior being, and it can be applied to a host of spiritual presences and powers. Every kami is said to emanate its own distinctive divine energy or force. Among the various specific designations are the following. Nature kami include the deities of mountain, agriculture, and bestowers of sustenance. Vegetation such as sacred ancient trees, and the heavenly lights. Some deities have manifested themselves as animals, such as a white bird, a deer, or a monkey. Ancestral or tutelary deities, Ujigami, include patrons of the clans. But they can also be nature kami. These are associated especially with shrines in regions once under the political control of the powerful families. As has often happened in Chinese traditions, some of Japan's kami also originated as historical figures who became deities by dint of their leadership in a clan. Large numbers of major shrines are dedicated to such figures. Other important historical kami include literary figures as well. Zoomorphic kami form another significant category, as represented, for example, by an Aries fox. A classification of kami connected with ancestor veneration and exorcism. Are wrathful deities and malcontent spirits called Goryo or Onryo. They reflect the moral ambivalence Japanese discern in the spirit world. Popular belief holds such evil spirits responsible for disasters from earthquake and famine to war and political failure. Many of the great sacred sites enshrine tragic heroes who suffered political downfall. Some kami function as scapegoats in that they become the focus of popular blame for all manner of unhappy events. Japanese tradition sometimes identifies kami as either era, wild and natural, or Nikki, placid and cultivated. In some cases separate shrines dedicated to these aspects of the same kami are located some distance apart. Another distinction is that between celestial deities, Amatsu kami, and the kami anciently associated with particular localities. Tradition portrays some kami as guests or visitors from a mysterious and faraway land called Tokoyo. Perhaps an acknowledgement of their origin in Buddhism and other imported traditions.
Have deists traditionally sent out missionaries to convert others?
Daoism generally has not been a mission-oriented tradition. There have been periods in the history of China during which deist authorities have made it clear that life would be more difficult for non-deists. A number of Chinese emperors espoused Daoism as the official state creed. In effect, and attempted to cleanse the realm of Buddhists. And there have been times when deists have been in serious competition with Confucians. But on the whole, systematic missionary activity is not the essential ingredient in Daoism that it has been in Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. When Daoism and CCT have spread, they have done so largely as a result of migration of Chinese merchant families.
How did conservative Judaism get its name?
Many 20th-century European and American Jews have agreed that orthodoxy must adapt to changing times, but have found some modifications introduced by leaders of Reform Judaism too dramatic. Conservatives have thus become Judaism's mid-ground. Responding to the Reformers' Pittsburgh platform of 1885, Sabato More 1823 to 1897, joined other Reform rabbis to found the Jewish Theological Seminary of America as a way of promoting a middle path between orthodoxy and reform. They stressed the progressive nature of the faith while retaining traditional practices. Like the Reformers, conservatives allowed some English prayers as well as organ music, and did not separate the sexes, and they taught immortality of the soul but not resurrection of the body. In 1924 the Rabbinical Assembly of America became conservative Judaism's institutional anchor in this country. Conservatives retain the orthodox emphasis on Scripture as normative, along with the bulk of its traditional interpretation. They do, however, make allowances for adaptation to modern needs, such as driving to synagogue on Sabbath. But while traditionalists among them insist that the revelation of Sinai was complete and definitive in itself, more liberal conservatives lean toward the idea that divine revelation is an unfolding process. Conservatives make up the second largest body of American Jews, numbering over 1.5 million with about 800 synagogues. Zionism has had many staunch supporters among conservative Jews.
What is the connection between regular observances and sacred history?
A fascinating variant in the ways different traditions arrange their calendars is how they determine the beginning of their reckoning of religious time or sacred history. Sacred history can begin with the creation itself, Judaism. With the birth of a foundational figure, Christianity, with a signal event in the early history of the community. Islam, or with a major political event or era, India and Japan. Some traditions regard the primordial event as a kind of midpoint in all of human history, a fullness of time. Others, especially those with cyclical notions of time, place considerably less emphasis on any particular event.
What are some of the other religious days Christians observe annually?
Numerous fixed feast days recall the lives of important saints as well as significant moments in the lives of Jesus and his mother Mary. Two significant events in the life of Jesus include the day his parents presented the infant in the temple. February 2nd, the presentation, and the transfiguration in which he appeared in divine glory to several apostles, August 6th. Jesus' baptism by his cousin John is, in the Western liturgical tradition, a movable feast that always occurs within the first 2 weeks of January. Feasts honoring Mary include those commemorating her being conceived without sin, Immaculate Conception. December 8th, her birth, September 8th, her presentation in the temple, November 21st. Elizabeth's visitation with Mary, May 31st, and her bodily ascension into heaven, Dormition/Assumption, August 15th. In some churches well over half the days of the year are associated with holy persons, often commemorating the death date. A major saint such as John the Baptist might even merit an observance of both his birth, June 24th, and his death, August 29th.
What is meant by the term divination?
Divination comprises a host of specific ritual practices meant to give practitioners a sense of control in the face of life's mystery. It occurs in association with most religious traditions, if only toward the popular fringe. Divination often involves some form of question and answer exchange.
Have there been any important Muslim religious reformers?
According to a hadith, Muslims believe that at the beginning of each Islamic century God will raise up for the community a mujaddid, pronounced mujahid, a renewer who calls people to a fresh awareness of their faith. Muslim tradition has identified a succession of important historical renewers. In modern times, too, a number of major reformers have taken on the daunting task of inciting their fellow religionists to adapt their ancient faith heritage to changing circumstances. Like reformers in any tradition, these Muslim pioneers have often met with resistance to the changes they proposed. Muhammad Abduh, 1849 to 1905, for example. Work to promote reason as nearly equal with revelation as a source of knowledge. His suggestion that some elements of the Quran were not of divine origin caused considerable stir. Abduh, nevertheless, served as Grand Mufti of Egypt and was a leading influence at the Al-Azhar University, a flagship institution of Islamic traditionalism.
Why do religious beliefs so often seem to be associated with intolerance?
Human beings dislike shades of gray. We prefer to persuade ourselves that we can keep truth and falsehood neatly separated. There is us and there is them, and we know who has the truth. Stereotyping and demonizing are natural next steps. Not only are they wrong religiously, they are somehow not quite up to our standards of humanity and thus to be pitted if not simply dismissed as irrelevant. Intolerance of religious diversity is a serious historical evil, a force that can easily be exploited by people of ill intent. And yet it costs so little to approach religious pluralism with an open mind. On the other hand, wars are seldom fought for purely religious reasons. Communities of faith often develop side by side in relative harmony. When problems arise, they are almost always initially political, economic, and social. Then, often enough, those who wish to keep the pot boiling invoke age-old religious differences as though they were the cause of every evil. They remind their constituents that if they really want to be loyal, they will not rest until some ancient slight to the faith has been set right. Underneath it all is the awareness that if you want to destroy a people's will, you must attack the most powerful symbols of their identity, some of which are bound to be religious. So, for example, in Bosnia during the 1990s, a major thrust of Serb policy was to obliterate as completely as possible all visible signs of Muslim presence, destroying especially ancient mosques and libraries and leaving paved parking lots in their place.
Is education especially important in Confucianism?
No major religious tradition has placed greater emphasis on education than Confucianism. That is not to suggest that Confucian teaching reduces the truth to mere intellectual development. For Confucians, education goes far beyond developing mental skills and acquiring information. It means the cultivation of the whole person within. The broadest possible perspective humanism under heaven. A number of very important Confucian institutions of higher learning have made major contributions throughout Asia over the centuries. Perhaps even more pervasive has been the Confucian influence in the development and maintenance of China's imperial civil service system. The educational system that produced and regulated the social class called the literati.
Do Hindus believe in miracles?
A special quality of Hindu belief generally is that all things, whether spiritual or material, result from the divine play or lila. God brings all things into being, sustains them for a time, then withdraws them from the realm of human experience, not by laboring, but as a kind of divine entertainment. That does not mean that God is cynical or cruel, dangling his creatures like so many marionettes. It means only that what we know as our world is the product of God's delight. Hindu tradition teaches that human beings are the beneficiaries of that delight. We are, in other words, invited to the party. The concept of miracle presupposes that human beings already know the limits of ordinary causality. From the Hindu perspective, that assumption is the height of arrogance because it suggests that human beings have things pretty well figured out, such as the causes and cures of disease, the roots of evil, and the wellsprings of good. One of the many aspects of the Hindu tradition's genius, and one of its major contributions to humanity, is that it refuses to close the door on surprise. All things, not merely the odd event that appears to defy the laws of nature, are cause for wonder. There is but one great miracle. God has chosen eternally to pour out the divine essence in its countless forms and enjoys doing so. What a gift of the ultimate perspective on life! To see it all as part of one great marvel and learn not to take oneself so seriously.
Are dreams and visions important to Buddhist tradition?
Important figures in Buddhist tradition are said to have learned essential truths through dreams and visions. Queen Maya dreamed that she would give birth under unusual circumstances to a child who would become the Buddha. In dreams, famous people learn of the proper course of action. Buddhist sources tell, for example, of how a dream persuaded the Chinese Emperor Mingdi to send for Buddhist missionaries and scriptures. Stories of this sort are told about many holy persons throughout Buddhist history, usually as a vehicle for underscoring the individual's personal authority. Accounts of dreams and visions are by no means uniquely Buddhist, of course, and tell us more about the tone and feel of popular Buddhist lore than about the tradition's central teachings. Visionary meditative techniques, a different matter altogether, are of great importance in some Mahayana schools. Esoteric schools, such as those of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism, use mandalas as visual aids in complicated techniques for creating mental images. The meditator generates a visionary world patterned on the mandala, in which the divine and the human interact and all distinctions vanish. Simpler visualization techniques are used in the more popular Pure Land tradition as well. Facing west, the meditator visualizes the sun setting, and water turning into ice. Gradually, the mind fills with images of a golden land with crystalline streams. lotus-filled lakes with golden bottoms, and shores of diamond sand. As the Pure Land, with its myriad jeweled palaces, takes shape in the mind's eye, the meditator sees the Buddha Amitabha and his attendant bodhisattvas. At length the meditator visualizes himself being reborn into that happy land enfolded in a lotus flower.
What kind of religious calendar do Jews observe?
The Jewish liturgical calendar combines elements of both lunar and solar reckoning. Lunar months are 29 or 30 days long, and the first month of the year is that in which the Exodus began. But tradition dictates that certain feasts must occur during certain seasons. So the calendar has to be adjusted every so often to prevent the lunar months from straying too far from the agricultural, or solar, cycle. To make it work, an extra month, called Adar Sheni, second Adar, is added during 7 out of every 19 years. The Jewish lunar months are called Tishri, September/October, Cheshvan, October/November. Kislev, November/December, Teves, December/January, Shavat, January/February, Adar, February/March. Adar Sheni, second Adar, inserted only in leap years, Nisan, March/April, Iyar. April/May, Sivan, May/June, Tammuz, June/July, Avi, July/August, and Elul, August/September. With the leap year provision, the lunar months slide back or forward but remain within the solar months indicated in parentheses.
What about observances related to the locality or indigenous practice?
In many parts of the world, Buddhists celebrate New Year's Day on January 1st. The observance is not a specifically Buddhist tradition but has become associated with it through a process of syncretism. Japanese Buddhists observe the spring and autumn equinoxes on March 21st and September 21st respectively. A festival honoring the dead, called Abon Matsuri, occurs between July 13th and 15th. Chinese All Souls Day. A parallel festivity, celebrated during the 7th lunar month. Features offerings thought to assist 7 generations of deceased relatives. A good example of an observance linked specifically to a single region is the celebration of Buddhist Churches of America Founding Day on September 1st.
Are there any Shinto divination rituals?
Bokusan is the Japanese term for the complex process of divining auspicious times for agriculturalists. Divination encompasses a variety of specific devices. As in Chinese community traditions, people often draw lots. The Chinese shake bundles of numbered sticks and pull the one left protruding, and Shinto worshippers draw numbered bits of paper. Sometimes they will read the angle at which an arrow sticks in its target, or read the designs on a turtle shell, or hold a deer's shoulder blade in a flame and observe how it cracks. A similar ritual uses arrows for slightly different purposes. People purchase white arrows at shrine shops, especially around the New Year, and use them as amulets, protective devices, at home throughout the year. Divination is required for setting the dates for many major festivals. Ritual leaders invite certain divinatory kami to be in attendance. As the diviner kindles a sacred fire on which to heat a turtle shell. Specialists then read the relationship of the cracks to lines and characters pre-drawn on the shell. A ritual cousin of Chinese Feng Shui is called Casso. It involves a set of geomantic calculations to establish optimal conditions for all sorts of human habitations. Another type of divination has worshippers write on small pieces of paper their various options as they prepare to make a major decision. In what may be a variation on a contemporary popular Chinese practice, people typically pull a stick from a bundle, read its number, and take a piece of pre-written advice from a correspondingly numbered drawer. Numerous Shinto shrines provide racks where people who find the advice unpalatable can tie their paper to be rid of the effects of the bad news.
Do Jews mark their sacred spaces with any distinctive signs and symbols?
In many parts of the world, Jewish places of worship have developed architecturally in the context of the local culture. The one architectural feature that sometimes distinguishes synagogues from nearby religious structures is that synagogues often have a central dome. Many mosques and churches have domes as well. But domed churches typically also have some sort of tower or spire, and mosques have a minaret or two. Synagogues with central domes rarely have prominent flanking towers. A common decorative item that can mark synagogues externally is the twin tablets of the law, a reminder of Moses' reception of the revelation at Sinai. A large Star of David often graces the facade or windows. Synagogues of more contemporary style often place a menorah of monumental scale, and sometimes even very abstract design, in front. One small but remarkable synagogue, that of Jerusalem's Hadassah Medical Center, boasts a striking array of symbolic decor. Famed artist Marc Chagall designed a series of 12 windows to adorn the upper walls of all four sides of the room. Each of the windows recalls one of the 12 tribes, coordinating each window's colors with the intensity of natural light available through the day on the various sides of the space. Chagall arranged the windows roughly in order of the age of the patriarch from whom each took its name. As the sun makes its round, it illumines each in turn. Chagall placed Reuben, the oldest, on the east, and Joseph and Benjamin, the youngest, at the other end of the sun's circuit. Each window is bursting with Chagall's own unique choice of symbolic reminders of the stories of each tribe.
What are mystics?
Mystics are those who have special insight into the deepest of spiritual mysteries. They often report first-hand, direct experience of realities far beyond the ordinary. There are some apparent similarities in the accounts of mystics across traditions. In a number of traditions we find two principal types of mystical experience. One is a highly personal encounter between the human subject and the divine reality, in which there is no permanent loss of individuality. This type is sometimes called theistic or dualistic mysticism. Another describes the mystic as utterly absorbed, annihilated, lost in a largely impersonal cosmic reality. Monistic is the name often used to describe this second type. There are equally telling differences from one tradition to another. And it is misleading to conclude that all religious traditions come together in mysticism. Especially in instances of theistic mysticism we find that the subject invariably describes the object of the experience in terms distinctive of his or her tradition. Christians encounter Christ and Mary, Muslims receive guidance from Muhammad, and Hindus merge in loving union with Shiva, for example. There are surely points of important crossover in the mysticisms of the various traditions. Still, the differences remain and must be acknowledged.
How did Islam spread under Muhammad's immediate successors?
Muhammad's immediate successors, called caliphs, pronounced Ka'ilif, inherited an expanding but loose-knit social fabric. The Prophet had united the Bedouin tribes under the banner of Islam. But tribal loyalties cooled quickly when the leader died. When Muslim elders in Medina chose Muhammad's father-in-law Abu Bakr as the first caliph, the initial challenge was to regather the tribes already reverting to their pre-Islamic ways. Umar, 634-44, the second caliph, then mobilized tribal forces to move northward into Syria and Mesopotamia, Iraq, westward into Egypt, and eastward into Persia. Next, Umar instituted important policies in the conquered lands, allowing the subjected peoples to retain their religion and law, and levied taxes often lower than what had paid previously to Byzantium and Persia. Muslim armies remained apart in garrisons that eventually became cities in their own right. Umar's successors, Uthman, 644-656, and Ali, 656-661, compassed the downfall of the last Sasanian emperor, but had to deal with disastrous internal strife as well.
Do Jews call their scriptures the Old Testament?
Old Testament is a term originally used by Christians as a convenient way of characterizing the relationship of the Hebrew Scriptures to the Christian or Greek Testament. Although one might hear the term as a pejorative reference to a revelation once valid but now abrogated and rendered superfluous. Some Jews still speak of the Old Testament as a concession to common usage. Christians generally regard the Hebrew Scriptures as integral to their faith tradition but of secondary authority whenever it is necessary to resolve an apparent conflict or contradiction between the Testaments. For Jews, Tanakh is the only testament.
Who are some of the main Islamic prophets?
Among the main Islamic prophets are Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Lot, Jacob, Noah, David, Solomon, Job, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, Elijah, Elisha, Jonah, Hud, Shu'ab, Soleh, Zachariah, John, the Baptizer, and Jesus.
Are music and dance important in Islamic religious ritual?
Muslims do not incorporate either music or dance into their primary religious rituals. And they use no musical instruments as part of communal worship. Though Muslims do not as a group sing hymns or other types of vocal prayer set to music. A type of tonal recitation is very much a part of Islamic religious life. A call to prayer, adhan, broadcast from the minaret. At least in areas where Muslims are the majority population, announces each of the 5 daily times for salat. The muezzin, pronounced muezzin, makes the call using a form of chanting that can strike the ear as very musical. Even though it has no melody such as we generally associate with songs. Formal recitation of the Quran is perhaps the closest approximation to music in Muslim ritual. Specially trained reciters, who typically have memorized the entire Quran, chant texts of the scripture using either of 2 styles of presentation. The simpler form is called measured and is sung with a recurring pattern of only 4 or 5 notes. A more ornate form, called embellished, uses a much wider tonal range, proceeds much more slowly, and punctuates the text with dramatic silences. Such recitation can be part of any religious observance in any venue. Outside of primary ritual contexts, Muslims all over the world have set religious themes and sentiments to music in countless local and regional styles and languages. Muslim musicians and singers across the globe are now producing devotional music for mass market consumption. From Morocco to Indonesia, tapes and CDs filled with contemporary musical interpretations of classical texts and prayers are becoming increasingly popular. Dancing often accompanies popular musical performances, especially those associated with the feasts of local holy persons.
Must a Jew live in Israel? Similarly, what is the role and importance of a Jewish state? Of a concentration of Jews in a secular nation?
The establishment of the State of Israel in the wake of World War II renewed and shifted the debate. Today, the autonomy of Israel is accepted by many nations. But the debate concerning the rights of Arab settlers in Israel rages on.
What were the earliest Hindu sacred texts?
A set of sacred scriptures, called the Vedas, consists of 4 distinct collections of texts, each with its own distinctive purpose. The name Veda comes from a Sanskrit root meaning wisdom or vision. The same root that gives us English words like video. According to tradition, seers, called rishis, composed the texts and communicated them orally. The rishis were able to see the truths revealed to them because they were also hearers of the sacred word. In fact, Hindu tradition groups the most sacred of its scriptures in the category of that which is heard, Shruti, to distinguish them from a secondary level of revelation called that which is remembered, Smriti. The Vedas evolved over a period of centuries, and religious specialists eventually wrote them down in an ancient form of Sanskrit. The earliest and most important of the 4 scriptures is called the Rig Veda, an anthology of more than 1,000 hymns to various deities. A second collection, called the Samaveda, includes material from the Rig, edited for ease of ritual use according to melodies and poetic meters. In the Yajur Veda, the early priesthood gathered the most important sacred mantras. A final collection of ritual incantations makes up the Atharva Veda. Many of the Vedic hymns are especially beautiful and offer a unique insight into how the early ritual specialists who made up the priesthood sought to understand and affect their world through contact with forces beyond human control.
What is a monk and how are Buddhist monasteries organized?
In its wider sense, monk refers to any male Buddhist who enters a monastic institution, whether permanently or for a short time, receiving at least the lower ordination to the status of novice, Shramanara. Strictly speaking, a monk is a male at least 20 years old who has been in the monastery at least 5 years and received the higher ordination to the status of bhikshu, mendicant. Monasteries are generally independent and autonomous foundations, rather like Benedictine monasteries in Roman Catholicism, a very loose analogy. Buddhist monasteries of the same lineage or order are administered separately. Each monastery's internal structure combines offices positions assigned by a monastic council or other governing body and ranks distinctions often based on seniority or spiritual acumen. Offices in a Japanese Zen monastery include, for example, chief abbot, In a complex with many sub-monasteries and temples, abbot, kancho, Zen master, Rashi, meditation leader and disciplinarian. Jikijutsu, in the Zendo or meditation hall, administrator of the Zendo, Jisha, and head cook. An important rank is that of head monk, Jushoku, who might also hold the office of abbot in a sub-temple. Similarly, in Thai Theravada monasteries offices include abbots and meditation masters. And recognize various ranks, such as those of elder, Thera, 10 years seniority, and great elder, Mahathera, with 20 years seniority.
How do Hindus deal ritually with death and mourning?
Hindus generally prefer cremation to burial, and most hope that their loved ones will scatter their ashes over the waters of the Ganges or one of India's many other sacred rivers. Every year many thousands of Hindu families bring the bodies of their loved ones to Benares for cremation at the burning ghats, steps, toward the downstream side of the holy city. There, or closer to home if they cannot travel easily. Led by the eldest son or an older male relative, the family completes a set of ancient rituals. They bathe and dress the body and light the pyre. The ritual leader walks 4 times to the left around the pyre and pours ghee over the body while the family chant divine names. For anywhere from 8 days to a month the family observes a period of mourning and ritual impurity. To bring that period to a close, many families arrange a ritual meal called shraddha. Relatives must minister to and nourish the dead person's spirit, lest it continue to travel abroad as a restless and potentially troublesome demon. In the case of a famous Brahmin, an extended period of mourning might last a full year. Especially holy persons, such as noted gurus, are sometimes not cremated but buried, seated upright in the lotus posture. Some sects, such as the Lingayats or Virashaivas, prefer burial for all members, possibly the result of Islamic influence. Hindus in Europe and the United States generally cremate their dead within 24 hours of death. Mourners, wearing mostly white, gather at the home for a final viewing. Family members often arrange a memorial service in the local temple to observe the death anniversary.
How do Shaivites honor Shiva?
Shivaratri, Shiva's night, is a monthly festivity occurring on the 14th night of the dark half of every lunar month, just before the appearance of the new moon. Once a year devotees observe Mahashivaratri, Shiva's great night, either during the midwinter lunar month called Magha or during the following month, Falguna, depending on regional custom. The feast celebrates Shiva's manifestation of his power and glory to Vishnu and Brahma in the icon called the Jyotirlinga or fiery linga. Girls who hope to marry soon often fast during the day and keep vigil all night. Festivities in parts of India generally last all night and often include massive street parties and processions featuring elaborate floats, ecstatic dancing, and sometimes extreme demonstrations of devotion in the form of self-mutilation. A full moon feast during Kartika, in the fall, is called Tripuri Purnima. It recalls how Shiva incinerated the demon Tripura's 3 cities, Tripuri, made of gold, silver, and iron. Meanwhile his consort Kali dispatched the demon himself, ending his partial dominion over heaven, earth, and hell, the 3 cities.
What is a religious tradition?
Religious tradition, as the term will be used throughout this book, refers to the various systems of belief and values around which communities of religious believers have formed throughout history and across the globe. Most readers are generally familiar with the names of many major religious traditions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and Shinto, to list only the largest. It's tempting to imagine that the members of each of those traditions believe nearly the same things, but that is so only in a very general way. Each of those super traditions in turn is really a cluster or family of traditions. There are many different flavors or styles within each, from the dozens of Christian churches to Islam's Sunni and Shi'i branches, to Buddhism's Theravada and Mahayana sub-communities. It would require a whole library of books to describe in detail the similarities and differences between the various communities of faith represented by the major traditions. This survey will hit the high points, but it will be helpful to keep in mind that it barely scratches the surface of an immensely complex reality. We will look only at some of the traditions that have left written records. And for practical reasons we cannot include the many traditions, such as the Native American, that have preserved their heritages orally.
What did the Jerusalem temple look like?
Solomon built the first temple around 950 BCE. After that was destroyed in 587/6 BCE, it was replaced by the Second Temple in about 516 BCE. That in turn was modified many times over the subsequent 5 centuries, most recently by King Herod. Though the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE, parts of Herod's construction are still visible as the western, so-called Wailing Wall. Biblical accounts offer detailed descriptions of various components of the temple, filling in some of the information archaeology has yet to unearth. Solomon's temple was in a way a permanent version of the tabernacle described in the Torah. A rectangle about 200 feet long by 40 wide, the temple consisted of 3 chambers. Up a few steps flanked by the 2 columns symbolic of the monarchs, Jachin and Boaz, and just through the east-facing main door was the vestibule. Beyond that was a large windowed room, the Heikel, Great Hall, where most rituals occurred, and the Dark Holy of Holies, Dever, shrine, elevated 5 or 6 steps, which only the priestly staff could enter, and where the ark was kept. Surrounding the central building was a huge courtyard with 3 gates on each of its 4 sides. In the second temple, the central building was larger, and set in the grander context of a series of courtyards. Along the walls of the court immediately enclosing the temple proper were chambers for the sacrificial materials. Directly in front of the temple porch, in the court of the priests, was a large altar for burnt offerings and a small slaughterhouse. Directly east of that, through a gate and down 6 or 8 steps, was the large women's court with corner chambers for lepers, Nazirites, oil, and wood. The second temple's shrine held no Ark of the Covenant. Surrounding the entire high platform was an immense wall, some of which remains today.
What is the historical and religious significance of Tiananmen Square?
In June of 1989, media coverage of the so-called Tiananmen Square massacre brought world prominence to one of China's most important public spaces. The huge plaza stands directly south of the Forbidden City and is named after the city's massive southern outer gate. The Gate of Heavenly Peace, Tiananmen, literally Heaven Peace Gate. In a matter of days the space had become a globally recognized symbol for a younger China's struggle for democracy. But Tiananmen Square had been a powerful symbol for the Chinese people for some years before 1989. Early revolutionary publications spoke of the place as the people's guiding star, the emblem of the new China. Situated just south of the ancient seat of empire, the square was created as a clear revolutionary response to imperial repression. The open People's Square was an obvious counterpoint to the exclusivity and mystery of the Forbidden City. Its placement to the south of the palace also meant that the square overpowered the palace by virtue of its greater access to yang energy, a symbolism surely not lost on countless traditional Chinese. Mao Zedong and his communist colleagues preferred to play off their new symbols of power against the old. They could have chosen simply to destroy the trappings of the decadent regime, but they might thereby have risked investing the former symbols with even greater power in the popular imagination. Better to reduce them to the status of mere museums. In the square now stand Communist Beijing's Great Hall of the People and the Museums of Chinese History and of the Chinese Revolution. Contemporary replacements for the old imperial symbolism. Between them and to the south stands the mausoleum of Chairman Mao, d. 1976, but facing north rather than south as the imperial centers had done for over 3,000 years. The goal of countless pilgrims today, Mao's Memorial Hall functions as a quasi-religious monument even in its rejection of China's imperial religious tradition.
What rites do Shinto practitioners perform in their shrines?
When worshippers go to their local or larger regional shrines, they may engage in several types of ritual called worship gestures, omeri, depending on the occasion. A simple list of 4 P's sums up the essential ingredients of Shinto ritual: purification, presentation of offerings, petition or prayers for blessing, and participation of the assembled worshippers. For ordinary, everyday prayers, in which they express a whole range of needs and concerns. Worshippers typically perform a simple offering before the sacred presence. Alone or in small groups, they enter the shrine precinct and proceed along the path, passing beneath perhaps several torii gates, to the purification font. There they take some water to cleanse the mouth and hands as necessary preparation. A ritual action called misaji, for approaching the holy place. Moving to the front of the shrine. Worshippers announce their arrival by ringing a bell that hangs over the threshold of many shrines. Ringing the bell may be either for quieting the mind or summoning the kami. With or without the bell. All toss a coin in the offering box, then bow and clap their hands twice to summon the deity. After making a brief prayer, they bow twice, one deep and one slight bow, and then depart. For special occasions, individuals or small groups can arrange for the services of the priestly staff. Rites that last from 10 to 15 minutes take place inside the front worship hall, Hayden. Various spiritual purposes of the rituals include divine blessing and protection. The opportunity to communicate with the kami about countless daily happenings and concerns. And expressions of personal dedication to the divine beings. These services are available most days in shrines with larger staffs. For the tradition has set aside no one day of the week as a canonical day of worship. In larger shrines, the priestly staff also make daily morning and evening offerings to the kami, in addition to the various daily rites. Shrines host numerous events throughout the year for special occasions, as described above, Matsuri.
Does ritual sacrifice play a role in Hindu ritual?
In Vedic times, animal sacrifice was a major component in many rituals. Animals as large as horses and water buffalo were offered. Sometimes in great numbers, along with smaller animals such as goats. Nowadays those large Vedic sacrifices are very rare, but wealthy patrons still occasionally bankroll them. Blood sacrifice does, however, survive as a regular component of puja in some temples in India. Especially those dedicated to Shiva's terrifying consort Kali. Devotees regularly offer goats and chickens in places like the Kali temple called Kali God, after which the city of Calcutta was named. The term yajna, meaning worship, homage, or sacrifice in a generic or symbolic sense, still describes many different kinds of ritual that involve offering or giving up symbolic or actual goods for the benefit of another. Offerings of special oblations to the deities date from Vedic times. But many Hindus still perform personal deeds of sacrifice in which they connect spiritually with the ancient sages and ancestors, all the deities, and all of creation. Sacrifice for the benefit of living beings, human and animal. Includes generosity with sustenance and charitable financial support.
Are there Shinto rituals of marriage?
Weddings in Japan have traditionally followed Shinto ritual, and the vast majority still include Shinto elements even when performed in connection with other traditions, such as Christianity. Until recent times, however, weddings occurred in homes and were performed by laypersons only. Since the mid-19th century, shrine nuptials performed by Shinto priests have been more common. A ceremony called shinzenkeken, nuptials in the presence of kami, may take place in a wedding hall on shrine grounds or in other public spaces. According to some, a marriage deity called Musubi no Kami, the god who ties the knot, is a Japanese counterpart to the moon-dwelling deist, Yulao, who bound together the feet of marriage partners. Many Japanese continue the ancient practice of arranged marriage, and some young couples still live with the groom's family, following Confucian traditions. At the heart of the wedding ceremony is a shared drink of sake, rice wine. Many Japanese families still value elaborate ritual as a form of social communication. And some will even have two ceremonies, one Shinto and one Christian, for example. Deist-influenced traditions still recommend that couples be wed only on days determined to be auspicious.
What are the feasts of the Buddha?
Buddhists in various places commemorate three important events in the Buddha's life: his birth, his enlightenment, and his entry into nirvana. Theravada Buddhists celebrate them all on the same day, called simply Buddha Day, on the full moon day of Vaishakha, April/May. Some Mahayana groups hold separate festivities on fixed dates, with Buddha's birth observed on April 8, called Hanamatsuri in Japan. His enlightenment, called Bodhi Day, on December 8. And his final entry into nirvana on February 15. Religious activities on these occasions include special gatherings in monastery temples. Devotees bathe images of the Buddha, listen to narratives of the Buddha's life, circumambulate his relics enshrined either in large structures called chaitayas, or small stupa or pagoda-shaped reliquaries, and water small Bodhi trees. Theravadins combine the festivities because tradition says that all three events occurred on the same day in different years. In Theravada Southeast Asia, Buddha Day remains associated with the onset of the monsoon rains and the planting of the rice crop.
When would the Messiah come? And how was one to identify him?
Largely on the basis of their reading of Scripture, the early followers of Jesus found the answers in Jesus. By a process that would come to be known as typological exegesis. Early Christians saw in numerous Old Testament personages anticipations or types of Christ. Abraham, for example, was a type of God the Father in his willingness to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, who was in turn a type of Christ. Jonah, who emerged alive after 3 days in the belly of the whale, was a type of Christ's resurrection after 3 days in the grave. A variation on the theme of typology saw in Jesus the perfection of realities only adumbrated in the Hebrew Scriptures. Aaron's priesthood, for example, was merely temporary, as evidenced by the destruction of the temple, but that of Christ was eternal, Hebrews 7. In addition to discerning these and other typological antecedents of Christ, interpreters saw in many prophetic writings veiled allusions to the Christ who was to come. In the so-called suffering servant texts of 2nd Isaiah, for example, early Christians detected such striking parallels to what they believed were the very essence of the life and death of Jesus that the prophet could only have been referring to this Messiah. In the Greek Testament, Jesus suggests a parallel between the works he now performs and Isaiah's references to a spirit-filled anointed one who preaches good news to the poor, frees the imprisoned, and heals the blind, and likens himself to Elijah and Elisha, Luke 4:16-30. These are only a few of the ways in which early Christians found legitimation for their views in Jewish tradition.
What rites do Buddhists practice in the temple?
Some of the ordinary ritual activity that occurs in most Buddhist temples is communal. Congregational chanting of mantras or singing of hymns occasionally plays an important role. But a great deal of Buddhist temple ritual remains relatively unscheduled and highly individualized. Worshippers in Theravada temples sit or bow before the Buddha image and recite traditional prayers in praise of the historical Buddha. Devotees often hold as an offering a candle, flower, food, or a small parasol, symbols of respect for royalty. Offerings of flowers are particularly helpful reminders of impermanence, since they invariably wither and fade. Worshippers generally regard sacred images as aids to prayer and often also as possessing certain magical powers, but the image is not itself the Buddha. Theravada ritual aims to overcome the suffering born of inappropriate craving. Some temples have wall murals depicting scenes from the Jataka tales, each one exemplifying one essential virtue. Worshippers can meditate on these scenes in succession and ponder the ethical implications. Since the Buddha was like an extinct fire that needs no more fuel, people do not worship him as such. Theravada temple ritual is meant to dispose the devotee for greater spiritual development. Popular Mahayana rituals are similar in some outward respects, but they focus on the Buddha and Bodhisattvas as repositories of saving grace and power. Worship is a means to assure rebirth in one of the Buddha lands. Rituals emphasize the need to surrender entirely to saving grace and boundless compassion. Ritual helps overcome ignorance of the ultimate sources of transforming spiritual power. Mahayana temples often display multiple images, sometimes having several walls lined with statues. Devotees can pay their respects to each, waving an incense wand clasped between folded hands as a gesture of veneration.
What is the relationship between Taoism and nature?
According to Taoist tradition, all things naturally exist in a primordial harmony. When things go wrong, whether in nature or in human society, the cause is invariably an imbalance in the equilibrium of yin and yang that results in a blockage of the flow of natural energies. Qi. Part of the problem is the human tendency to seek control. When that desire leads to ill-conceived attempts to dominate nature, the outcome can only be disastrous. Nature yields its abundance easily and graciously to all among the 10,000 things. Creatures, that are willing to receive without grabbing or hoarding. When human beings develop a warped notion of their place in the larger scheme of things, attempting to force their will, all of nature may suffer temporary setbacks. But in the end, nature's balance will return. Traditional Chinese landscape paintings say it much better than words can. Massive mountains loom in the upper part of a hanging scroll, their craggy peaks bathed in sunlight. From the heights a waterfall cascades into the valley below, forming a lake as the stream emerges into the plain. Tucked away in a mountain scene, a tiny human figure sits meditatively in a picturesque pavilion. Further below, an unobtrusive figure shoulders a load across a small bridge. A solitary fisherman drops a line from his slender craft. Between valley and peaks, or perhaps where the peak imperceptibly becomes valley, hangs a misty cloud of that cosmic force known as Qi. Landscape paintings, called mountain water pictures, thus suggest the perfect balance between yang and yin.